Hi there, my name's Emmie Ellie, and this is the story of how I started my YouTube channel. It sounds wacky, but one of these angel cards inspired me, or perhaps all three did. But a month after I drew those cards from the pack, I uploaded my first ever video about achieving wellness in the great outdoors. To help explain my new YouTube journey, I need to take you back, way back. I'm no stranger to the camera. I've been vlogging before the World Wide Web was created. I even used to be a TV presenter decades ago. But my experience of truly enjoying the outdoors only really started in my 40s. But as the saying goes, life's roughest storms prove the strength of our anchors. After some horrendous experiences at work, I was left completely vulnerable, broken, and alone. Like a tortoise, I retreated into my shell. For several weeks I was on sick leave, and I was not getting any better being imprisoned at home. I didn't even recognise my face in the mirror, and I was falling deeper into the pit of despair. Something inside me said I needed to get away, but the vertigo I was suffering from prevented me from going anywhere. It was a battle of wills. Somehow, I found the courage to look at a map. Then that progressed to looking at campsites. Then I started meal planning. Then writing a kit list. So I guess I'm going to Cornwall then. My destination was 300 miles away, so I planned a couple of stopovers to check in with myself. The first stop being Somerset, home to cheddar cheese and cider, neither of which would help with my insomnia and flashbacks, but it was an eco-friendly campsite which appealed to me. En route, I went to Starbucks on one of the services. I was doing my best to appear above my troubles, but they misspelt my name terribly, and that was a bad omen which kicked off my anxiety. Was I doing the right thing going away? I've no recollection of driving to the campsite in Somerset, but the weather was just miserably wet and cold. I didn't even consider bringing extra layers of clothing for camping in summer. This added more doubts to whether I was doing the right thing by going away. I knew I'd be tired by the time I got to the campsite, so I'd pre-prepared dinner and I just needed to warm it up. But even that was a struggle to do, as everything was so damp I couldn't get the Kelly kettle lit. Again, it just feels like everything was conspiring against me. After a sleepless night, I was really annoyed at the birds making a racket at 4 in the morning. This was not the rest I desperately needed, until one of the birds sounded like R2-D2 on steroids, and suddenly I burst out laughing. I hadn't laughed in ages, so I recorded the dawn chorus on my phone as a funny record of the trip. Everything was soggy from the persistent rain in Somerset, but I packed everything up for the next stop in Dartmoor. Again, I have no recollection of driving there, but that I had arrived. I put the soggy tent up, but the mildly uneven ground was enough to set off my vertigo again, and I was in real trouble. I've always wanted a wild camp in Dartmoor, and this was my first opportunity to see what it looked like, so I stuck 2 fingers up at my vertigo, grabbed a few things, and went for a walk up to Pew Tor. This is only one of 2 vlog shots of me on this trip, and I can see that's a painted smile on a distressed canvas. I certainly didn't film this with the intention of starting a YouTube channel. It looked like rain was approaching from all directions, and I started to feel uneasy again. Sad to say, I found Pew Tor really fearsome and disorientating, as if it had eyes watching me suffer. This was not making me feel any better. Then I flipped those negative thoughts on its head, and I felt the texture of the rocks with my hands. Those rocks had real strength and tenacity, being exposed out there for millions of years. It wasn't imposing, I reflected. Those rocks were actually standing confidently. With that thought, the sun appeared, and I headed back to the campsite to cook dinner and reflect on my thoughts and feelings. Another morning, another wet tent to pack away. But as I lay there, I was thinking, those birds don't sound remotely disappointed being in the rain. They still sound their cheery selves. So off I went to the furthest west of England I've ever been, and I was about to tackle those narrow country lanes whilst already suffering severe mental distress. The campsite wardens kindly reserved a large quiet corner for me for the 5 days. Maybe my tent might get a chance to dry off, as it was making things rather uncomfortable. I arrived on the summer solstice, but I was too in my head to think of going somewhere to watch the sunset. To me, it just signals the doom and gloom of dark, depressing winters. So I stayed at the campsite and then got bothered by 2 hungry stray dogs who were after my food. Am I ever going to find peace on this trip? That thought was then followed by a loud party just outside the campsite. I would have got annoyed were it not for the sheep in the next field joining in on the karaoke. The next morning, I settled in and properly organised all my stuff. The ice packs were still relatively frozen after 4 days in a cool box. The cold weather might have something to do with that. I was low on provisions, so I planned a circular walk to the coast, then to the village shops, and uphill back to the campsite. I was struck by how deep blue that sea was. I've never seen anything like that in the UK. I felt like I was abroad. I'd seen some YouTube videos of the Cornwall coast, and it looked so idyllic. What nobody mentions is how much you have to climb up and down along the coast. It's a real thigh burner. After visiting the local co-op, the footpath took me through several fields to get back to the campsite. I began to panic about being attacked out here. My actual thoughts were, if something bad were to happen to me, they might find my GoPro footage of my route. So I started filming. Again, this was never intended to be on a YouTube channel. I didn't know it at the time, but feeling the tender leaves like this is actually a grounding technique for times of acute stress. Thankfully, I got back to the campsite unharmed, and I made a lentil soup on the Kelly kettle and fried off some chicken to go with it. I've had my Kelly kettle for 8 years, and it's been with me on every car camping trip. Every time I use it, it brings back childhood memories of visiting my grandma who lived abroad. The original house had an outdoor kitchen, which she'd use to cook over fire, and I'd stand next to her feeling comforted. A year later through counselling, I began to understand that my grandma meant safety to me when I was a child. When I pack it away at home, the smell of it is like being hugged by my grandma. That's why the Kelly kettle is a cherished item of my camp kit. I had a bit of a clumsy moment and spilt half the soup on the ground, but I'd had enough left bulked out with a baguette to keep me satisfied. Normally I settle in after dinner, but there was just something pulling me towards Kynance Cove that evening to watch the sunset. I don't like crowds, so maybe that was the reason for heading here at this time. Maybe. I'm scared of cows, so I put my fears to one side and headed down from the National Trust car park. I hadn't even checked the tide times, but I did observe it long enough to see it was going out. It was just so beautiful, and it was about to get better. The geology here is amazing. Look at those little blue rocks. I was really hoping my vertigo wouldn't return on the way down these steps, because there doesn't appear to be anyone around to help me. The atmosphere just felt magical. It was like the very few of us that were here were on a pilgrimage. The sea was so clear. These rocks during golden hour felt like being on another planet. With all the anxieties I've had so far on this trip, it was this moment I realised I was meant to be here. We'd exchanged a smile a little while earlier, and then I spotted her here as still as a statue, which got my attention. It was almost as if the universe was telling me something. I was meant to be here and learn something. I realised I've always kept myself busy because I can't deal with certain situations in the present. I later found out this is also a trauma response. Whoever she was, I'd like to thank her for helping me understand how to be present in the moment. I braved the cows once more to get back to the car, and as it was still light, I headed to Lizard Point, or what I mistook for Land's End. I then watched this little hill come to life at dusk. On the way back to the car, I saw this painted stone, another sign from the universe, a reminder of where I was and where I am. It's been quite an impactful day. After a better night's sleep, I felt I got some courage to explore Cornwall a bit more and headed 50 miles north to Trianon Bay. I parked up by the National Trust site and walked along the coast. On the way to the waaaaay for lunch, I passed a gorgeous sandy beach with lifeguards. I didn't bring a swimming costume with me on this trip because I certainly didn't have the confidence when I was packing. But I couldn't resist buying one from the local beach shack and got changed into it, and then returned back to the lifeguard beach for a swim, only to find they put red flags up. I just couldn't help myself laughing. So off I walked 2 miles back to the car with the swimming costume still on. The weather on the penultimate morning was pretty grim, but the forecast was looking positive. So I went to find another beach, hoping to have a swim. I just couldn't believe my eyes. Was this really Britain? This is impossible. I had such a beaming smile. I did it. I'd had a swim. On my own. I couldn't leave Cornwall without having a Cornish pasty. That went down well after my swim. With my confidence growing, I drove a little more near to Porthcurno Beach, but I ended up walking to Logan Rock. The sun was hot, so I sought shelter by the big rocks, looking out at the sea, watching boats, birds, and reflecting on life. On the way back to the car, I thought this image was quite fitting. The sign is telling you where to go, but life has a way of carving out a separate path. This was my last day. I checked out of the campsite and headed to Church Cove to fill my cup with a bit more of Cornwall. I didn't want to leave. The confidence I had grown from driving down those narrow country lanes meant so much to me at a time when I felt like I'd lost everything after what was going on with work. I didn't have vertigo again after that bout in Dartmoor. I just felt different in a positive way. But have you ever had that feeling of dread about returning back home? I stopped over at the same eco campsite in Somerset as before, only this time feeling much more alive. That week sure did fly past. It was lovely waking up to the views of King Alfred's Tower from my tent. I spent that day occupying my mind off of the return trip by packing my stuff away. High winds and rain was forecast for the next morning, so I thought I'd rather sleep in my car overnight than deal with the impracticalities of returning home with wet gear. That afternoon I started to cook a curry with some roti. I'd never made roti whilst out camping because it's messy to mix the flour and water when you don't have a sink nearby. But I gave it a go nevertheless. And you know what else I did? I switched the camera on. So here I am at this gorgeous campsite. One thing I've always wanted to do is try and cook Mauritian roti on the Kelly kettle. And that's how I began making Kelly kettle cooking videos. I look so much more healthier and confident than a week ago. That's purely down to changing my environment and being in the great outdoors. The fact that I had enough confidence to do this gave me even more of a lift, as it brought back memories of better days of working in TV. See how it goes. Never done this before, and I'm quite self-conscious that I'm talking to myself. I went for an amble at sunset to see King Alfred's Tower in the woods. Sadly, this was my last night camping after being away for over a week. Anxious thoughts stopped me from getting a good sleep. I wondered if I could get out again and film some more cooking videos. That'd be nice, I thought. And a year later, the Wellness Blanket channel was created. My path to healing is going to be tough work. But if I can combine that with my interest for food, filming and the great outdoors, I'll have more stories to tell of my wellness journey. Thank you for watching, and also thank you to everyone that has supported my journey and clicked on the like and subscribe button.